In a flash, everything changed when I heard my husband's angry voice on the phone. He yelled, "Why do you always fall apart when I need you?" He didn't seem to care that I was in the hospital because our baby was in danger. He complained about being hungry and waiting for my cooking while I was stuck in the hospital. He said he'd had enough and was going out to eat with his parents, leaving me to figure out how to get home on my own. His anger made me feel even worse, especially because I was scared for our unborn baby and worried that I couldn't protect them. I used to be a dedicated cosmetic salesperson known for my hard work and success. I had many awards and loved my job. Meeting my husband felt like a dream come true, and our relationship quickly turned into marriage. When I found out I was pregnant, I had to make a tough choice. Leave my job to avoid the risk of miscarriage, thinking about what was best for our family's future. As my pregnancy progressed, my husband's support seemed to disappear. What used to be excitement turned into frustration. Simple tasks became overwhelming for me, and I struggled to meet his expectations. He would ask, "Where's my lunch?" and then criticize the simple sandwiches I made, saying I couldn't handle smells. He dismissed my difficulties with, "Pregnancy is not an illness," making me feel alone in my struggles. This was so different from the man I had fallen in love with. He stopped coming to doctor's visits and showed less concern for the household chores that were becoming too much for me. Our home, once filled with love and respect, felt like a constant battle as I tried to protect both myself and our baby. I hoped that we'd eventually find our way back to understanding each other. Maybe he's just tired and stressed from mentoring a new person at work. I kept telling myself that once the baby is here, his busy schedule will ease up and we'll settle into a good routine as a family. I reassured myself, whispering "okay," while gently touching my growing belly, trying to stay positive despite the challenges with my changing body and our strained relationship. Things between my husband and me haven't improved. On top of that, my in-laws have started showing up unannounced, which has added to my stress. They criticize the cleanliness of our home and worry about how we'll manage with the baby, but they still expect me to serve them food right away. I feel overwhelmed and unprepared, and their visits always end with disappointment. My husband never stands up for me and seems to agree with their criticisms, making me feel like I'm not good enough. One day, while heavily pregnant and sent out to buy groceries, I collapsed from exhaustion. I woke up in the hospital, having passed out from overdoing it, but thankfully, our baby was fine. The doctor said I needed to rest for a few days. I saw missed calls from my husband and thought he must have been worried. But when I called him back, instead of relief or concern, he greeted me with anger. "Where have you been?" he demanded harshly, as if my health and our baby's safety didn't matter to him. His cold words made me shiver. I tried to explain, "I'm sorry I collapsed at the store and had to come to the hospital. They have me on IV fluids and want me to stay here for a few days." But his response was unfeeling and impatient. "You collapsed and I'm supposed to care. Why don't you answer when I call?" "You're so slow," he said, making me feel even worse. I couldn't stand the thought of our baby being exposed to this negativity. I pleaded, "Please stop yelling. It's not good for the baby," but he ignored me. He continued, "We're starving here waiting for your awful cooking, and you're just relaxing in the hospital." It was clear he wanted to go out to eat with his parents and leave me on my own, even though I was in this condition. His anger and lack of concern were overwhelming. I ended the call, feeling completely alone and heartbroken. As I returned to my hospital room, tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. In that vulnerable moment, a familiar and comforting voice reached out to me. "Are you okay?" I looked up to see Helen, a customer I had grown close to from my days as a cosmetic salesperson, offering me a towel. Seeing her brought me immense relief and warmth. "Helen, it's really you. I'm so glad you remember me." Our unexpected reunion felt like a beacon of kindness and human connection during my darkest hour. Helen was more than just a customer to me. After a tough divorce, she had lost her confidence and stopped wearing makeup altogether. I remember approaching her at the cosmetics counter and offering to help her try some makeup. The change in her wasn't just physical. It was a boost to her self-esteem and a step toward emotional healing. Over time, Helen became a friend, not just a client. But then, 5 years before I left my job, Helen stopped coming in, and I often wondered what had happened to her. Now, here she was, providing support when I needed it the most. "I had been hoping to reconnect with you, Helen," I said. "I was surprised to find out you had left your old job when I went looking for you." "I'm sorry for just showing up out of the blue," she replied. "I had been working abroad. I run a business overseas, and it's been very busy. I hadn't had a chance to enjoy summer or good food in ages. So once things settled down, I decided to come back. And believe it or not, right after, I tried to find you," Helen said with a laugh that made the situation a little lighter. "I ended up here with appendicitis. It's just in the early stages, so medication should handle it. If this had happened while I was still abroad, the treatment cost would have been sky high, so in a way, I'm glad it happened here." Her optimism and warm smile were contagious, and this surprise reunion cheered me up. We happily reminisced about old times. As our conversation went on, Helen, with her kind smile, gently asked, "You don't have to share if you're not comfortable, but I noticed you seemed upset earlier. What's going on?" Feeling I could trust Helen, not just as a former customer but as a real friend, I opened up about my troubles with my husband and in-laws. "I'm really worried about bringing my baby into this environment. I'm afraid they'll be treated the same way I am. And without my job, the thought of living independently, especially with a child, feels overwhelming." To my surprise, Helen made a truly generous offer. "I actually have an apartment you could use. I manage a few properties as part of a project I started with land I inherited. It's a cozy 2-bedroom with a separate bathroom, soundproof walls, and it's in a safe neighborhood close to supermarkets and a police station. You wouldn't need to pay a deposit right now, and you can start paying rent whenever you're ready. It's a really good deal. What do you think?" Helen's excitement and sincerity were so genuine that I couldn't help but laugh in disbelief. "Are you sure you can offer it at such great terms?" I asked, overwhelmed by her kindness. "Absolutely," Helen said. "I trust you'll take good care of the place, and I think it's important to support each other in tough times. You're more than welcome to stay there," she assured me with a warm smile. Helen's unexpected kindness felt like a ray of hope. It wasn't just an offer of a place to stay, but a chance for a fresh start. Her generous gesture was something I couldn't refuse, so with heartfelt gratitude, I accepted. Days later, once the doctors gave me the all clear, I left the hospital and moved straight into the apartment Helen had set up for me. She had arranged everything effortlessly over the phone, showing incredible generosity. I didn't go back to the home I shared with my husband. Instead, I embraced this fresh start in Helen's cozy and welcoming apartment. Although I felt a bit guilty about not paying rent right away, Helen just laughed it off, telling me not to worry. While my husband was at work, I went back to our old home to pick up my things. It felt strange and empty, much like how I felt inside. Helen's support went beyond just offering the apartment. She connected me with a lawyer who had helped her before, and this solidified my decision to pursue a divorce. The lawyer's encouragement gave me hope, and with each hospital visit confirming the health of my baby, my resolve grew stronger. One day, as I left the hospital, I was alarmed to see my husband waiting for me. I panicked and tried to leave quickly, but my pregnancy made it hard to move fast. He confronted me about the lawyer and our living situation, gripping my arm tightly. I stood my ground, insisting that any discussions about the divorce, compensation, or child support should be handled through the lawyer. I refused to return home with him. As he tried to force me to go back, a young woman stepped in to help. Rebecca, as she introduced herself, immediately stood in front of me, showing clear protection. Her familiar interaction with my husband George revealed the underlying tension. Rebecca firmly told George he couldn't take me against my will, and even threatened to call the police. Her determination and the mention of the police were enough to shift the situation, giving me a glimmer of hope and the strength to assert myself. Seeing Rebecca's seriousness, George looked frightened and quickly left. I felt a wave of relief that nearly made my legs buckle. Rebecca immediately came to my side to support me. "Are you okay?" she asked, and I apologized, feeling overwhelmed by relief. Rebecca quickly called a taxi for me, insisting on making sure I got home safely. Despite feeling bad for causing her trouble, she reassured me it was no problem. When I told her my address, she was surprised to learn that I lived just below her. It was a happy coincidence that we were neighbors. Rebecca, cheerful and kind, turned out to be a new employee at George's workplace. She had reported his inappropriate behavior, which led to him being removed as her mentor. George was known for his lack of empathy toward female employees, often making insensitive comments about personal issues like menstruation and marriage. Rebecca shared that George's behavior wasn't just a problem at work. I had experienced it firsthand during my pregnancy. 3 weeks after meeting Rebecca, we had become good friends, enjoying dinners together. She shared that George had been moved to a subsidiary company after multiple complaints and problems at work. Interestingly, Rebecca was Helen's daughter, the same Helen who owned the apartment I was staying in. George had previously bragged about handling Helen's account, but his poor behavior led to his demotion. Helen had pushed for George's transfer after learning about his actions both at work and toward me. Rebecca, determined to address workplace issues on her own merit, had only acted after realizing my connection to her mother. Helen had encouraged Rebecca to gather and present evidence against George, which led to his transfer. With George's reduced income and increased workload, his position had changed significantly. Helen, drawing on her experience, advised me to stay firm and not be swayed by George's attempts to gain sympathy, which was incredibly reassuring. After I decided to divorce George, he tried to contact me through the lawyer, expressing how tough work was and how much he missed me. He even apologized and asked me to come back, but I remained resolute in my decision to divorce, supported by Helen. George had no choice but to accept the divorce and agree to the terms for child support and damages. As time went on, I faced a new challenge with my in-laws, especially my father-in-law, who was overly excited about the baby being a boy. I sensed trouble brewing, and it wasn't long before my in-laws made their move. One day, while I was heading out, my father-in-law grabbed my arm. He had followed Rebecca, thinking he would confront her, but then saw me and demanded that I give up my baby once born, claiming the baby was the family's heir. Despite my efforts to free myself, his grip was too strong. Just then, Rebecca's firm voice demanded he let me go. In a swift motion, she used a judo technique to throw him. Rebecca, a top-ranked judoka with national titles, had mastered judo to protect herself and her mother during difficult times. She confronted my father-in-law, criticizing him for ignoring George's actions and trying to interfere in my life. She defended my right to start over and made it clear that their meddling was unacceptable. The sound of approaching sirens revealed that Rebecca had called for help before coming to my rescue. My mother-in-law, who had been waiting in a nearby car, watched quietly as the police arrived and took both her and my father-in-law away. My father-in-law was arrested, and after some reflection, my mother-in-law decided to divorce him and start a new life in the countryside. George tried to persuade his mother to let him come with her, saying he was fed up with his job and the family drama, but she firmly rejected him. Through the lawyer, my mother-in-law sent her apologies and left some money as a gesture of goodwill. Helen explained that it's common for people to feel lost after leaving a marriage and that the money was likely her way of apologizing and supporting my son's future. I was surprised by her support, given her past behavior, but grateful for her attempt to make amends. After finalizing the divorce, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. My mother-in-law chose to live in the countryside, preferring solitude over staying with George. When my father-in-law was released from custody, he found that the house had been demolished by my mother-in-law before she left. He ended up moving in with George, which only led to more problems and eventually caused George to resign from his job due to a damaged reputation. Despite the upheaval, child support payments continued to come in reliably, likely managed by Helen and the lawyer. Rebecca was recognized at work for her efforts and became a project leader, earning admiration from her colleagues. Helen's projects, including women-only properties and housing for foreigners, were thriving. As for me, once my son was old enough, I planned to return to work. Helen had offered me a position at a new high-end cosmetics store she was opening. She continued to support me and showed affection for my son, as if he were her own grandchild. Rebecca also made time to visit us. Both of them reminded me of the strength and kindness that had carried me through the toughest times. I was determined to be as strong and protective of my son as these incredible women had been for me.
Get out! My mother-in-law, Catherine's harsh words hit me like a cold wind when it was decided that my husband would be sent to work in another country. Catherine took our house away from me and my little girl. With no place to go, I ended up in the park, holding my 2-year-old daughter, feeling lost and unsure of what to do next. Suddenly, police officers surrounded us. "Please come with us to the station," they said as rain poured down, making me shiver from the cold. Reluctantly, I followed them to the police station. There, I was surprised to see someone unexpected waiting for me. My name is Emma, and I'm turning 35 this year. I met my husband Bob at work, and after dating for a year, we got married. When we had our daughter Lily 2 years ago, I stopped working. Now, I live with Bob, Lily, and my mother-in-law, Catherine. We used to rent a place, but after Catherine's husband passed away and she started having trouble with her knees, we decided to live together and bought a new apartment. We thought it would be best to live somewhere with good transportation access because of Catherine's knees. Buying an apartment was cheaper than a house at the time, and it has an elevator, which makes life easier. Catherine also preferred the apartment, so we made a down payment and took out a 35-year loan. Bob's job often requires him to travel or relocate, but since we bought the apartment, we were told he wouldn't be transferred for a while. However, he travels for work more than other employees, about once a week to other states. Having a 2-year-old daughter, I feel really stressed when my husband Bob goes on his business trips. At first, my mother-in-law Catherine was helpful, but now she doesn't help with taking care of our daughter at all. Instead, she makes more work for me. For example, she eats and leaves her dirty dishes lying around, and she doesn't rinse cooking utensils after using them. I'm often busy with our daughter, so by the time I notice, the food is stuck to the dishes, making them hard to clean. Even when I ask her to at least rinse them, she just says sorry and promises to do better next time, but she doesn't. I notice that she rinses the dishes when my husband is around, but not when I'm alone. This made me think that Catherine is intentionally making things difficult for me. Sometimes, when she asks if I need anything from the store and I say no, she later tells me she actually needed something, which happens a lot. I used to try to help Catherine a lot because of her bad knees, but now I'm feeling less inclined to do so because of her behavior. I thought about talking to my husband Bob about it, but he's already stressed from work, so I didn't want to add to his worries. Catherine's behavior started soon after we moved in together, and it's been going on for years now. When I talked to a friend about it, she said it sounds like Catherine is bullying me and suggested I talk to Bob about it. But I worry that if I do, Catherine, who doesn't have any other family, might end up in a care facility. So I thought it might be better to just deal with it. However, one day, something happened that made me reconsider. That day, I planned to drop off my daughter Lily at my parents' house. They love having Lily over for sleepovers. Thanks for always bringing Lily. We love having her here. Why do you stay over sometimes too? My mom suggested. I'd love to, but I'm worried about leaving Catherine alone. I'll head home. Just don't spoil Lily with too many toys, I replied. After a nice chat, I left and headed back to our apartment where Catherine was waiting. When I got back, I realized I had forgotten my keys inside. At first, I was worried, but then I remembered Catherine was home. I tried calling her using the intercom, but there was no answer. Maybe she had gone out. I decided to wait outside for a while. But even after waiting for 2 hours until it got dark, Catherine didn't come back. When another resident returned and unlocked the main entrance, I followed them in. Catherine rarely goes out at night, so I was sure she was still at home. I rang the intercom again, but still no response. I could hear a faint sound from inside, confirming Catherine was there. I tried a few more times, but she refused to answer. Feeling defeated, I decided to stay at a nearby motel for the night and planned to sort things out when my husband Bob returned from his trip. What happened? Out shopping. I told Bob that Catherine had locked me out. He was understandably upset for me, but Catherine just brushed it off, saying, "Oh, maybe I didn't hear you because of my hearing." I'm getting old, with a smirk on her face. I was relieved to be back inside. After getting my keys, I went to pick up Lily from my parents' house. When I talked to my parents about what happened, they said, "Sounds like Catherine is making things difficult for you. If it gets too much, you can always come back here." Their comforting words brought tears to my eyes, but I quickly wiped them away before heading home with Lily. For a while, things seemed okay with Catherine. But then, out of nowhere, Bob's international transfer became final, It was a permanent move, not just a short business trip. We finally bought a place, and now this international assignment. What do you think? Bob asked me. I think it's best for you and Lily to stay in the US, I replied. But when he asked if I could handle living with my mom, I hesitated. Thinking about the potential stress it could cause Lily, I decided it would be better for us to stay in the US. After we made that decision, Bob had to leave for Europe. Although he was worried about us, he was really busy with work, so it was just me, Lily, and Catherine at home. But things quickly went downhill once Bob left for Europe. Catherine's attitude completely changed. On a stormy day when it wasn't safe to go outside, Catherine dropped a bombshell on me. Now that Bob's gone, wouldn't it be better if you and Lily move out? She said. Excuse me? What do you mean? I asked, shocked. Just what I said. I'll take over from here. I just feel I can't relax with strangers in the house. I'd appreciate it if you could leave right now. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Catherine's request felt like a slap in the face. Despite not being blood relatives, I had always treated her like family and tried my best to make our living situation comfortable. But to Catherine, it seemed like we were just unwanted guests. As I contemplated gathering our belongings and returning to my parents' place, Catherine uttered, "Instead of wasting time, why don't you just leave?" Before I could react, Lily and I found ourselves standing outside, still in our everyday clothes, evicted from our own home. No matter how hard I knocked on the door, Catherine refused to let us back in. Lost and bewildered, I carried Lily through the pouring rain to a nearby park. Thankfully, there was a shelter there that provided some relief from the rain. Ideally, I would have checked into a motel or gone back to my parents' house. But I had left my wallet and phone inside. Feeling helpless, I sat in the park, trying to figure out what to do next. Time seemed to blur as the rain continued to pour down. Exhausted and cold, I started to drift off to sleep despite the darkness and biting cold. I worried about Lily catching a cold. As terrible as it seemed, the only option I could think of was to walk to my parents' house, even though it would take 3 hours. As I sat there pondering our predicament, I noticed 2 faint lights in the distance coming closer. Due to the rain, it was hard to see clearly, but I could make out that they were from 2 police officers. I thought maybe they could offer some assistance, but before I could approach them, one of the officers called out to me. "Are you Emma? And is this little one Lily?" the officer asked. Surprised by their recognition, I weakly replied, "Yes, that's us." "Please come to the station with us," the officer said. "Why, the police station?" I asked, feeling puzzled. Wondering if something was wrong, Lily and I followed the officer's instructions and got into the patrol car. We were shivering from being out in the rain for so long, but the officers had brought large towels to help keep us warm. "You might need these. We've got some spare clothes back at the station for you," they said kindly. Curious about why they knew about us and why we were headed to the police station, I asked, "How did you know where to find us?" They replied, "We'll explain everything once we're back at the station. For now, just try to relax." Exhausted, I soon drifted off to sleep and woke up to find that we had arrived at the police station. Following the officers inside, I was surprised to see Catherine and my uncle waiting there. "Uncle, what are you doing here?" I asked, puzzled by his presence. "He was contacted by Bob," my uncle explained. "Bob suspected you might be having problems with his mom, and since he's overseas, he asked me to keep an eye on things for him." According to my uncle, Bob had talked to him about this issue previously. He said Bob had asked him to keep an eye on things because he couldn't be there himself. My uncle had seen us out in the rain earlier today. He had considered taking us in himself, but he thought Catherine's actions were extreme, so he decided to report it to the police. That's how the officers knew where to find us and came to help. Catherine had also been summoned to the police station. She sat on a sofa, glaring at me, appearing unaware of why she was there. "Why do I have to be here? My knee is bad, you know. If Bob was here, this wouldn't be happening," Catherine argued. But the whole situation stemmed from Bob asking my uncle for help. In discussions with the police, it seemed likely that there could be legal consequences. Therefore, I was advised to consider hiring a lawyer. That's an exaggeration. I just locked the door, that's all. I didn't do anything else, Catherine defended herself. Do you even realize what you've done? You threw Emma and a little child out in pouring rain. That's unforgivable. My uncle defended us, asserting that I was the rightful owner of the house. That's impossible. Bob is the head of the household. He's the rightful owner. Now that he's not here, it should be mine, Catherine argued. Catherine believed Bob was the owner, but she was mistaken. In fact, my uncle, who runs a real estate business, helped us get a great deal on a condo. Bob suggested putting the property under my name. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now I'm grateful I listened to Bob's advice. Following my uncle's guidance, I decided to hire a lawyer. The lawyer explained that it would be difficult to remove Catherine from the house. Therefore, the best option might be to place her in a care facility. Upon hearing the lawyer's advice, I immediately called Bob to explain the situation. Bob hadn't realized the situation had escalated so much and said he wanted to return from Japan to discuss it properly. He also mentioned he was considering placing Catherine in a facility. Meanwhile, Catherine, oblivious to all this, was snacking on crackers casually at the police station. Since I couldn't return home with Catherine, I decided to stay with my parents until Bob returned. He would be back in a week, giving us time to think about our next steps. If Bob didn't support me, divorce seemed like the only option. I regretted not seeking advice sooner. A week later, Bob returned from Europe and was at the house with Catherine, so I moved back home from my parents' place. Bob had to return to Europe soon due to the urgency of his job. He could only stay in Japan for a few days, so we needed to discuss our next steps. I heard some things from Emma's uncle. Is all of that true? Bob asked. It's all lies. I haven't done anything. Emma's plotting something to evict me. Catherine stubbornly refused to admit any wrongdoing. She even accused me of scheming against her. Bob, who I expected to support me, seemed to want to consider Catherine's perspective. I understand. So do you have any evidence to prove Emma's plotting something? He asked. Evidence? Of course not, Catherine replied. I see. Emma, do you have any evidence? Bob turned to me. To be honest, I've been so busy with work, I haven't been able to keep an eye on things. I'm not sure who to believe, I admitted. I handed Bob something I had with me. What's this? He asked. It was a voice recorder I had been using. It contained recordings of Catherine's verbal abuse towards me, including the time she evicted us. When Bob played it, he heard Catherine saying hurtful things like, "Such a worthless wife. I wonder why he even married you." Hearing this, Catherine quickly began to defend herself. This is taken out of context. Everyone has their moments, right? I was just frustrated at that time, but it was just this once. As Catherine claimed this, the voice recorder played more recorded verbal abuses, showing that it wasn't just a one-time thing. Bob's hand, holding the voice recorder, trembled with tension and anger. Meanwhile, Catherine looked guilty. "Mom, what is this about?" Bob asked, but Catherine remained silent. "If you won't answer, then I assume this is all true. If so, I need to protect Emma and Lily. You understand that, right?" Bob's anger was palpable, something I had never seen in him before. Catherine, seeing this side of Bob for the first time too, looked frightened and couldn't say a word. After several discussions before Bob's return to Europe, I made it clear that I couldn't continue living with Catherine. With Lily around, I couldn't risk another incident like the one before. Bob seemed to agree, leaning towards placing Catherine in a care facility. However, Catherine strongly opposed the idea, making the discussions more complicated. Despite the opposition, I decided to sell the house. "You can't stay here anymore. If you don't want the facility, you'll need to find another place," I told Catherine. "How dare you decide this on your own? I won't allow you to sell the house." Catherine resisted the idea, but it was a difficult request to ignore. Lily and I had already decided to move to Europe. Bob regretted not being more present for his family and wanted to be there for us moving forward. Although I was hesitant about living abroad, knowing Bob would be with us reassured me. Plus, Lily is only 2, and it would be beneficial for her to learn and grow in Europe. Therefore, selling the condo, which still had a mortgage, was the only viable option. If we left it as it was, Catherine would have to cover the mortgage, but her fixed income wouldn't suffice. Given her future prospects, it was crucial for someone to assist her. Despite our efforts, Catherine refused to move into a facility voluntarily. So we had no choice but to arrange for her to be placed there forcefully. I'm sorry, but I have to head back to Europe. Could you handle any necessary procedures here? Bob asked before leaving. With the help of others, I managed to finalize Catherine's admission into the facility. The staff there kept me informed about her condition, but unfortunately, she wasn't doing well. It would be one thing if she were simply feeling down, but it seemed she was causing trouble for the staff and other residents. Before heading to Europe, I visited her to check on her well-being. However, she lashed out at me, accusing me of locking her up in the facility. She also complained to the staff about the food, comfort of the beds, and other residents' behavior, expressing frustration and dissatisfaction. When I apologized to the staff for Catherine's behavior, they were very understanding. "It's okay," one of them assured me. "We're used to dealing with this kind of behavior. Just leave it to us. We'll keep you updated, and if anything happens, we'll give you a call, so don't worry." Despite all the trouble Catherine caused me while we lived together, I couldn't help but feel concerned as I headed to Europe. When I arrived in Paris, Bob met me at the airport, and we went to the apartment we had rented. Rents in Paris are known to be higher than in Texas, but thanks to the housing allowance from Bob's company, we were lucky to find a spacious and affordable place. Living in Paris has been a delightful experience for me and Lily. Our neighbors are incredibly friendly, even though I'm still learning French. Recently, one neighbor shared wine and cheese with me, and I returned the favor with mac and cheese. I'm slowly learning French, and Lily is picking it up too. I've enrolled in a language school to improve further, where I've made friends with other Americans new to France. In the past, I had to constantly worry about Catherine back in the States, which often stopped me from fully enjoying outings with friends. But here in Paris, I can relax and enjoy leisurely lunches. My main concern now is Lily, who is still too young for kindergarten. Most kids in France start kindergarten at 5, so I hope she learns enough French by then. Luckily, Lily seems to be learning quickly. Once Lily starts preschool, I'm considering getting a job. Bob is supportive of me staying at home, but being in Paris has made me want to explore new opportunities. I've made friends with a waitress at a nearby cafe who hinted there might be a job for me there. The cafe is popular among Americans and locals learning English, so it could be a great fit. While there may be challenges ahead, living in France has strengthened our family bonds. I feel more confident expressing myself, and I believe we'll face any challenges together as a family. Overall, I've never been happier in my life. 2 years after we got married, I still felt like we were just starting our journey together. It had been 2 years since we promised to be together forever, but my heart sank when my wife happily announced, "I'm going to have a baby." The father was my boss. I remembered her saying, "Let's wait to have kids. I want us to enjoy being newlyweds when we first got married." My name's Ryan Kitchen, and I turned 30 this year. I married Susan 2 years ago after meeting her at work. Even though we worked in different parts of the company, I couldn't help but admire her beauty whenever we passed each other in the office or shared an elevator ride. When a coworker finally introduced us, my heart soared with joy. I'd always looked for chances to chat with Susan, and I wasn't going to miss this one. I watched all the movies and read the books she suggested. Slowly but surely, my efforts to get closer to her were paying off. At that time, it seemed Susan had a boyfriend, but I didn't pry too much into it. I was showing her that it didn't matter to me. Looking back, I'm amazed at how persistent I was. Susan decided to leave her job and become a stay-at-home wife, and I'm glad she's taking care of our home. She's taking cooking and flower arrangement classes, having relaxed lunches with friends, and enjoying a comfortable life. 2 years into our marriage, just when our parents started hinting about wanting grandchildren, something unbelievable happened. The busy overtime season was over, and I was feeling great, leaving work on time. Thinking that Susan might be feeling lonely because of my busy schedule, I decided to surprise her with her favorite cake on my way home for the upcoming long weekend. I thought we could go on a mini vacation together. I grabbed brochures of nearby tourist spots from a travel agency near the train station. To save her the trouble of cooking, I ordered takeout. I'm back. I managed to leave work early today, I told Susan as I took off my shoes at the front door. She hurried over from the hallway, looking surprised at my early return. While explaining about the takeout dinner, I handed her the cake she loves. However, something seemed wrong with Susan. "Susan, is everything all right?" I asked, handing her my suit jacket and noticing her small nod. Her expression was serious as we sat down in the living room. Susan took a seat across from me, and then she dropped a bombshell. "I'm pregnant, and I think we should end our marriage." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Susan and I hadn't had any children yet. She was the one who had initially wanted to wait before starting a family right after our wedding. I had agreed to wait, wanting to respect her wishes to enjoy our early married life. We had been careful for the past 2 years, so how could she be pregnant now? "I want a divorce for the sake of the child," she said, a phrase I never expected to hear from her in such circumstances. I had always imagined using those words joyfully together. Susan's expression was blank, but her decision to divorce seemed final. "Please sign these papers." "I want a divorce for our child," Susan said, laying out divorce papers already signed by her. Susan's parents had already signed the witness section of the divorce papers. She had talked to them beforehand. "I want to find out who the father is, but I can't lose my composure here. I have my dignity too," she explained. "So you're sure about this?" I asked, and Susan nodded firmly in response. After that, I struggled to keep the pen steady as I signed the papers. Susan neatly folded the divorce papers, indicating she had already packed her belongings. With a large suitcase in hand, she made her way to the door, leaving me speechless. I couldn't find the right words for Susan as she prepared to leave. She didn't look back at me. Her feelings for me were gone, evident from her expression. She disappeared into the fading light, dragging her suitcase behind her. All I could do was watch her leave. That night, I drank alone until I passed out. Waking up in the living room, I realized I had caught a cold. It wasn't just a hangover. I was plagued by headaches and chills. I called my workplace and said I needed a sick day to recover. Reflecting on last night, I wondered if it had all been a dream. But there sat the liquor bottle and the pen on the living room table, reminding me it wasn't a dream. Susan had really betrayed me and left. Reality hit me hard, and my chest ached with pain. It's true what they say, the harder they fall. I couldn't believe how much I now despised Susan, the woman I had once loved so deeply. Determined to find the other man, I spent the day searching through Susan's belongings. Despite my anger, I couldn't help but notice the ring and bracelet I had given her during our dating days still in the jewelry case. And then I found our wedding ring in the trash. What was she thinking when she threw it away? Just thinking about it made me feel sick. Despite spending the whole day looking for clues about the other man, I'd only succeeded in worsening my fever. Despite my efforts to keep busy, my health didn't fully recover in just one day. In the end, I ended up taking a week off from work to sort things out. When I finally returned, I was taken aback to find that my coworkers already knew about my divorce, even though I hadn't shared the news with them. "How are you holding up, Ryan? Seems like you're quite sensitive, getting sick over a divorce," remarked my direct boss, Tom Gary, with a smirk. Gary had always been a thorn in my side, constantly making things difficult for me with his pretentious attitude and questionable behavior. As I reluctantly tolerated his presence, it dawned on me that he had mentioned the divorce. Then it hit me. Before Susan and I got married, she and Gary used to work together in the same department. Didn't Susan inform you about the divorce? Or were you too busy nursing your fragile ego? He taunted, and suddenly everything clicked into place. Are you the father of Susan's baby? I asked through gritted teeth. Gary, with an air of superiority, confirmed it. That's correct, he replied, clearly enjoying my discomfort. In that moment, I didn't fully comprehend the gravity of my actions. When I regained consciousness, Gary lay sprawled across the room, surrounded by a toppled chair and scattered desk items. My fist throbbed with a dull pain, a testament to the altercation. The scene resembled a chaotic festival, with some people assisting Gary while others attempted to restrain me. Despite being struck, Gary found amusement in the situation, laughing at the trouble I had unwittingly invited. He had manipulated me into losing control. Gary happened to be the grandson of the company's founder, making matters worse. By punching him, I had assaulted a future executive. Predictably, I was suspended and ultimately terminated from my job. Now, I was not only unemployed but also abandoned by my wife. My life spiraled into disarray. Though I knew I needed to find work to survive, my actions lagged behind my thoughts. Daytime became an excuse to drink, and nightfall brought more of the same. It was a self-destructive cycle, devoid of motivation. The only solace was my savings, a result of past diligence. After about a month, an unexpected visitor appeared. Initially, I pretended not to be home, ignoring the doorbell. However, it persisted, ringing again after 30 minutes, prompting another round of feigned absence. An hour later, the doorbell chimed once more, aggravating my already frayed nerves. Irritated, I grumbled about the intrusion as I begrudgingly answered the door. Standing before me was a stranger, a woman of unfamiliar stature, her gaze piercing into me with a judgmental intensity. I felt a wave of discomfort wash over me, prompting me to shift my gaze away. "May I ask who you are?" I inquired tentatively. The woman, exuding an air of dignity and strength, wasted no time in getting to the point. "Are you the former spouse of that woman?" Her directness nearly caught me off guard, causing my heart to skip a beat. It was clear she was referring to Susan, and she didn't mince words. She introduced herself as Lillian Gary, confirming my suspicions about her relationship with Gary. The prying eyes of the neighborhood ladies passing by only added to my unease. I had always found their penchant for gossip unsettling. "Please come inside," I offered hastily, hoping to avoid further speculation. Lillian accepted the invitation graciously and stepped into the disarray of my home without hesitation. I hadn't made any effort to tidy up, but she didn't seem deterred. As we entered the cluttered living room, she silently began to gather the scattered debris. "I can handle that myself," I protested weakly, but she dismissed my objections. "We can't have a meaningful conversation amidst this chaos, can we? If you're not going to assist, please take a seat." She snapped, so I straightened up and settled onto the couch, watching in silence as she efficiently tidied up the room. "Why don't you freshen up?" she suggested. Her words caught me off guard, prompting me to hurry to the bathroom. I quickly washed my face, startled by the unfamiliar face staring back at me in the mirror. I shaved, washed, and combed my hair, feeling a semblance of normalcy return. For the first time in a while, I felt a bit more human. Returning to the living room, I found the cleaning already completed, with the trash bagged and placed in the hallway. "I used your kitchen," Lillian mentioned as she handed me a cup of tea. She seemed surprisingly capable for Gary's wife. "Thank you. I feel like myself again," I expressed, surprised by the sincerity of my gratitude. Lillian responded with a faint smile, though it quickly faded. "My husband asked for a divorce because he fathered a child," she stated bluntly, clearly not one to mince words. "I went through the same thing with my wife. I'm already divorced," I responded, indicating that it was no longer my concern. She let out a deep sigh, suggesting that Gary's indiscretions were nothing new to her. Apparently, he had previously settled a scandal involving Susan with money, leading her to immediately marry me as a sign of ending things with Gary. This time, Gary attempted to resolve matters with money again, but Susan refused to budge. From Lillian's tone, It was evident she still harbored feelings for Gary and desired to rid herself of Susan. "So, you want to reconcile with Gary instead of getting a divorce," I summarized, surprised that she could still have feelings for someone who had cheated on her twice with the same woman and had a child with her. Lillian appeared taken aback when I asked if she didn't want a divorce, as if the thought hadn't crossed her mind. "Do you believe it's possible to move forward from this?" I questioned, finding her expressions and demeanor intriguing. I awaited Lillian's response with anticipation. With a slight smile, she simply remarked, "We're still married after all." I'm not sure why, but her words left me feeling defeated. In the end, I asked Lillian to leave, agreeing to revisit the discussion another time. The day following Lily's visit, Gary paid me a visit. It appeared he had been informed by Lillian about her conversation with me the previous day. As a former superior, I ushered him into the living room. Gary glanced around the room and chuckled. "What's amusing?" I inquired. "Lillian's handiwork, isn't it?" Gary replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. I hadn't noticed, but it seemed Lillian's touch was evident in the tidiness of the room. The camaraderie between them grated on my nerves. When I questioned his reason for visiting, Gary disclosed that he had a favor to ask. He wanted me to persuade Lillian to divorce him. His request left me stunned. According to Gary, Lillian is unable to conceive, and he desires an heir. Susan's pregnancy presented a perfect opportunity for him. He offered me a bribe to persuade Lillian to agree to a divorce, placing a thick envelope on the table. The sight of him trying to resolve everything with money sickened me. "I want children, something Lillian can't provide," he stated, pushing my patience to its limit. I grabbed him by the collar, but he continued laughing, seemingly confident he wouldn't be struck again. Just as I prepared to swing my fist, a soft hand intercepted my raised arm. "Is my husband worth hitting?" Lillian's voice cut through the tension as she entered the room. "You left the front door wide open." "That's careless," she scolded me, causing me to release my grip on Gary. "Okay," I muttered, feeling the momentum drain from my confrontation. "So you desire a child." Lillian murmured, her gaze fixed on Gary, who nodded in agreement. From her back, she produced divorce papers. "Are you satisfied now?" she asked, offering the papers to Gary with a stunningly beautiful yet unsettling smile. As Gary accepted the papers, his fingers brushed lightly against her hand, leaving me with a sense of intrusion. I quickly averted my gaze, feeling as though I had witnessed something private. "Thank you," Gary muttered before swiftly exiting. "We're enemies now, aren't we, Gary?" Lillian waved without turning back, indicating that he had accepted her declaration of war. Once Gary disappeared from view, Lillian turned her attention back to me. "Shall we nurse our wounds together? But first, let's seek our revenge," she proposed. We both decided to separately demand compensation from Gary and Susan. Knowing their wealth, we anticipated they would comply with our demands regardless of the amount. I instructed my lawyer to handle all proceedings simultaneously, driven by my desire to see them suffer, even if just a little. This retaliation would be child's play, a small taste of payback. After making our demands, Susan finally appeared, tears streaming down her face. It seemed Gary would pay his share, but he refused to cover Susan's portion. While this was expected given their unmarried status, there seemed to be more to the situation. During a meeting involving the four of us, Gary attempted to shift blame onto me for Susan's infidelity, citing my busy work schedule as the cause of her loneliness. "You're quite the master of deception, aren't you? But your tricks won't work on me," I retorted. Lillian then produced a report from Gary's private investigation, commissioned by his parents. It revealed that Susan and Gary had been involved prior to my marriage to her, and Susan had accepted a settlement to end their relationship. However, their affair had continued clandestinely. Apparently, my marriage to Susan had been Gary's idea as a cover-up. My dedication to work and my somewhat insensitive nature made me an ideal husband for their purposes. Additionally, working alongside Gary provided them with a convenient means of monitoring me. The level of detail in the report compiled by Gary's parents at significant expense, was astonishing. Lillian calmly read through the contents, causing Gary and Susan's faces to pale. Susan was the first to crack, her hysterical screams filling the room until they were cut short by tears. "Stop it now. It's not good for the baby if you stress yourself out." We reprimanded her, prompting Susan to flinch. Under the weight of Lillian's icy gaze, Susan fainted on the spot. Gary, in a panic, rushed to her side, cradling her in his arms. Lillian's smile hinted at her surrender. "That's a pity. I believe Lillian truly loves Gary. Love and hate are two sides of the same coin. The deeper the love, the deeper the hate," she mused. It seemed Gary understood this too. In the end, I played no part in the discussion, as Lillian dominated the conversation. As the meeting concluded, Lillian laughed at me, saying, "That's it." Afterwards, news of my divorce spread throughout the workplace, as I had disclosed it to my colleagues. Despite the company's attempts to keep it under wraps, it was too late. Gary found himself sidelined at work and estranged from his family. Susan, now remarried, struggled with issues involving her in-laws. Gary's parents, who favored Lillian, treated Susan poorly, having driven Lillian away. Once all the alimony and other matters were settled, I invited Lillian for coffee. She shared her current situation, working at a friend's company while living independently. "I can't have children, so I need to be self-sufficient," she explained. Seeing her speak with such sincerity eased my fears. "I don't agree with your reason for independence," I admitted, surprising both of us with my firmness. I noticed she still wore her wedding ring, a reminder of Gary. Summoning my courage, I expressed my feelings, asking her to wait until I found a job. "I hope to become your partner," I confessed. Lillian seemed taken aback at first, but then chuckled, acknowledging her complexity. "I know I can be difficult," she admitted. "I'm well aware," I replied, gently tracing the back of her hand with my finger. It seemed she was letting go of her past as she removed her ring. Then she lightly touched my hand, her affectionate gesture filling me with warmth. "I'll make you happy, so please wait," Lillian explained, her laughter brimming with joy. In that moment, I vowed to protect her smile forever. As the video concluded, I reflected on our journey together, eager for the future. What did you think? Subscribing to the channel will encourage us to produce more.